And good afternoon, everybody. Hello. You've joined us for Into the Absurd, a virtually existential dinner conversation here at the Idiopathic Ridiculopathy Consortium in Philadelphia. And I'm your host, Tina Brock. On today's show, Professor Rosemary Malague, and we'll talk to Rosemary about her book, An Actress Prepares, and all kinds of great things associated with the craft of acting and how her studies have informed both her work as a performer and as a professor. And all that is coming up on the table. Thanks so much to you who have been with us since June. And if you're just coming in, we're really happy to have you. Put your questions in the chat box if you're joining us on Zoom in the Zoom room today. If you're coming in on Facebook Live, we're so happy to have you here. Your questions for Dr. Malague as well. And hey, we have a podcast now. It's out. It's on Amazon Music and it is on Spotify and iTunes. So catch us over there. 33 episodes since we started in June, and really looking forward to getting back onto the stage with you as I put up this virtual background today, which is actually an opera theater. I just couldn't help but feel that twinge of just, gosh, can we get back? And hopefully in 2021 with you in the audience, we'll be there. So looking forward to that. On today's show, Dr. Rosemary Malague. Dr. Malague is a director of the Theater Arts Program at the University of Pennsylvania and the author of An Actress Prepares, Women and the Method. And today we're going to delve into all of that, everything you wanted to know about the Stanislavsky and American training programs through the eyes of Rose. So let's get Rosemary to the table and begin this conversation.
Hi, Tina.
Yes. Hi. Does looking at this theater behind me give you a sense of wanting to get back?
Wanting to get back. Yeah, it feels like a long time, doesn't it?
Yeah, the word surreal doesn't even begin to sort of describe, does it, this sense? And I'm sure for you as a professor and just doing a lot of virtual work with your students and whatnot, it's got to be a bit of a time capsule.
Well, it's such a strange time because we feel the essential live nature of theater is so vital, and to be teaching the subject and the discipline in a period when there is no theater, it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Yeah. I think a whole show could be done just on, sort of the virtual medium and what we were talking a little bit about before the show, what that does to the performative aspects of things. But let's get to the book, An Actress Prepares. And I want to dive right in there and just find out when you were at Villanova, I believe was when the first grains of this this started. Tell us about why you knew you needed to write the book.
Well, I had the great good fortune of being an acting scholar at Villanova University, and I have only wonderful things to say about that program. It really did change my life. I had been out and about and acting for a while, so I did not return to graduate school till the year I turned 30. And I had been in actor training in New York and had knocked around as an actress, as one does. And I had not had a very happy actor training experience. And when I got to Villanova, I had the opportunity to study with Joanna Rote, who I know was one of your guests earlier this year, and she's become a dear friend of mine. And she was teaching Stella Adler. I had studied with people in New York who were mostly the disciples of Lee Strasberg. So that had been my real initiation into Stanislavsky-based training. And I found myself in that first year at Villanova, I think, interested in the vast differences between these approaches. And so when it came to, I was also, I should say, studying, the person who was teaching acting at the time was a woman named Roxanne Ricks, and she was teaching the work of Sonia Moore. And when it came time to do my master's project, which at Villanova is an orals project, so one studies, researches, and then has a presentation and conversation with professors, what I became interested in was something that really nobody had yet done, which is separate out the differences between and among the Stanislavsky-based American practices. So I wanted to take on all of that. But I worked with a professor who was there at the time, Jeff Prohl, who was very influential in my career. And he helped me narrow the project. So what I looked at specifically and decided to look at those, well, that's central to the story. I decided to look at the question of producing emotion on stage and how were the approaches different, all derived from Stanislavsky, but Strasberg approach extremely different from Adler's. And I didn't initially decide to work on Sonia Moore. In fact, what I did was I read Sanford Meisner's book. And I'm not about to dismiss Meisner. I think some Meisner trained actors are absolutely fantastic. But I had this visceral reaction to reading Sanford Meisner on acting. And anyone who's read it might remember there's certain passages like he does a repetition exercise and he demonstrates it. And when the young woman, he says, will you go out with me? I won't go out with you. Will you go out with me? And of course he's an elderly, infirm man. I won't go out with you. And this culminates with him saying to her, the acting teacher, the famed Sanford Meisner, as printed in his book, you're a professional virgin. I was horrified. And there's also an exercise in that book where to demonstrate, I think it's what he calls the pinch and the ouch, he actually reaches into his student's blouse and grabs her breasts. And I found this so repellent, but not in a really conscious feminist analytical way. It was just so repellent, I knew I did not want to do my project on Sanford Meisner. So I pivoted to studying Sonia Moore. And I will say that Jeff Prohl said to me at the time, oh, Rose, you could write about gender and actor training. And I think he knows this, but at the time I thought, oh yeah, because I'm a woman, I should write about gender and actor training. But when I got to the Graduate Center at the City University of New York, I had more great good fortune to study with Jill Dolan, who is a hugely important scholar, author of Feminist Spectator's Critic in 1988. And I took this feminist theater class with her where she wanted us to approach something with a feminist critical lens. And what immediately jumped to mind was this book that Sanford Meisner had written. So that was the seed of the project. I guess it began with my own training in New York, but really it was when I began thinking about theory, why it was we really didn't know the differences. And people since then have done really good work. Alison Hodges' book is out, and David Krasner's written a couple of great essays on the distinctions among and between particularly the three group members, Strasberg, Adler, and Meisner. But that's how it started. So I have to credit Jeff Prohl with sort of planting the seed, and really Jill Dolan for changing my whole life with having the chance to study with her.
When you were in New York and studying, and you said you had some experiences that weren't fabulous, can you relate any of that?
Describe them? Yes. So I deliberately in my book and in this podcast, I do not name any of my teachers or the training. And I say to protect, the innocent and the guilty.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think the first thing I have to say is I truly am deeply grateful for that experience. And again, I wouldn't have any of the things that I have in my life or be doing any of the things I'm doing had it not been for that training. I learned a tremendous amount and everything flows from that. But it was hard. I think a lot of people who've been to acting school have difficult experiences, and it was hard for a lot of reasons. There was a kind of brutality to the approach of some of the teachers. There was I always had the feeling there was something we were meant to be doing, but I didn't quite understand what it was. What I say in the book, it did seem to me that, it seemed to me then, and I worry that this may still be true now, is that women were rewarded for two things. Either being able to portray, present themselves as sexual objects or as victims. And so I like to say, but it's true, crying was rewarded. If you could break down and cry, and it's mostly true of women in actor training, but crying, if you can cry, fantastic. And the other thing I remember, someone who went on to have a career, and I won't name her, it took off her blouse in a scene from Equus. And so these were the actresses where people said, oh, she's taking these risks. Oh, she's, and I remember thinking, yeah, what's the nature of the risks? And I didn't really think about it deeply till later, but I noted it was hard not to note what was being praised and rewarded in a fashion that sometimes felt, is it titillating to the teacher? But even the teachers, straight or gay, it didn't seem to matter. Something about, yeah, displaying those qualities seemed to be what people were looking for.
Yeah, so you're saying, what is the risk they're taking there? The question that you asked yourself, what is the risk they're taking? Was there any nod to vulnerability on a wholly, fully different scale that doesn't end up in like crawling around on the floor, drowning in tears, that was sort of a more subtle? Because it's interesting that those are pretty psychologically based. That is a platform that we work off of, in that, and that there's a whole lot of colors in that rainbow, for vulnerability. Like, I think it's interesting. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder,
I would say from my perspective of these many decades now, or few decades, there was no framework for making students feel safe. And I would describe myself, so this I have to own, I was a bit of an innocent. I really wasn't ready for New York and where those people were coming from. I had been playing ingenues and was still, sort of one myself. And I would say in that actor training, though, it wasn't just women who suffered this. People broke down on a regular basis. And it did seem that's part of the project, to just break you down, to get you to fall apart. Often using, this didn't so much happen to me, but I remember seeing it with other people. Getting people to make intimate personal confessions in class and then cry. And somehow, it was very disturbing when those things happened.
Did you observe in those instances that the person felt like they were having a hard time with that? Was that part of what made it disturbing, or was it just
absolutely?
So it was the added function of, this person is having a hard time managing this trauma?
There was a lot of crying, in class, and then there was crying out of class. And one of the things I write about in my book that I found problematic about this approach is that this kind of training can rob a performer of confidence. And we need our confidence to be able to get up on the stage, and that sort of tearing you down, or my own recollection, but I feel that I speak for a lot of people, because anyone who has read the book, or when I used to, while I was writing the book, give papers on the subject, I cannot tell you the visceral reaction listeners would have, like, oh my God, that happened to me, or wait till I tell you this story. Including in my early years teaching here at Penn, I remember one of my students had a close friend studying at a major institution in New York. And she said, yeah, my friend told me my teacher spat in her face to get a reaction out of her. And so there is a risk of abuse. And as I say in the book, there's something so specific about actor training that we are expected to do, well, and about acting, right? I mean, I think this can be problematic in rehearsal rooms, but to do what we're told on the spot, like, do this. And to succeed, you have to do it. And you can't question it, and you can't resist it, and you can't say, I have objection to this. I think being compliant has been a huge part of actor training, and being able to deliver what you're being asked to do. So one of the risks, I think, obviously this is not everyone, and even within my own training, not every teacher, but this was a pattern I wanted to investigate. Where does this happen? Why does this happen? I think it's possible that in some instances, certain kinds of personalities are drawn to this kind of thing. It's They're people who enjoy this kind of control over acting students, and yeah.
Do you think that, well, let me back up there. In the foreword to your book, you talk about how there's certainly many stellar qualities that the Stanislavsky-based training brings into them. Are there a couple that you would point to that you think are helpful in your own work, or that you feel are like the table legs that really hold it up?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So I mean, yeah, I should say at the outset here, I'm a huge believer in the Stanislavsky system in all of its manifestations. So I'm not somebody who says we need to walk away from it. I'm a huge believer. I think that what happened for me was that in my own training, no one was asking us to read anything or assigning us to think about theory. We were asked to check our intellects at the door. And, what I have to take full responsibility for, even though I was, all of 21 years old or whatever, I wasn't doing that research on my own. Somehow, I mean, school was very draining. We're working round the clock. So I wasn't reading theory outside of that experience. And it wasn't until I went to Villanova when I began reading theory, even just having an understanding of what the principles are behind what you're doing is incredibly empowering. I'm trying to think, so what do I think are the most important?
Like disconcentration, I mean, that certainly figures into it. Imagination.
Certainly relaxation,
Yeah.
being in the moment. I'm a huge believer in script analysis. So I do think being able to read a script and understand it, not just from an acting perspective, but what is the playwright doing? What's the play doing? What's my function in the play? But certainly, yeah, I had acted, on instinct until acting school. So I had done a lot of acting, but had not been trained. And so there's so much, including being able to access one's emotional life and use it on the stage. Yeah, those are just a few things. But of course, imagination, research, concentration, relaxation, and being present with one's acting partner.
It does seem like, from reading your book and sort of other research, that the train went a little bit off the tracks when, right, it had different disciples that interpreted it differently, and each one had its own sort of fundamental principles. And having studied with Strasberg devotees as well, that's my indoctrination into it. But it does seem like at its root, actor-based, Stanislavsky-based training has some really fundamental, enduring aspects of it that just got, morphed or interpreted differently,
or even fetishized.
mm-hmm.
With the word, and people becoming cult-like figures with disciples. So it did become, in a certain period, real mid-century, mid 20th century. And then I guess at the writing of my book, I continued to feel that a lot of people are teaching as they were taught. And I wonder, now that we're deep into the 21st century, well, there are fewer people who studied with Lee Strasberg or with Stella Adler, and perhaps that next generation who studied with their pupils. I have a more eclectic approach, and I believe in taking what works. I also feel strongly that what works for one person does not work for another. And so this idea, well, quite famously, one of the things is said about Stella Adler, that here Strasberg wants her working on her emotional life, and she's so emotionally available that that's the last thing she needs to be working on. So I think it's such an individual thing. And there was this period when there were these very rigid strains, and to some extent with cult-like followings, especially Strasberg. But curiously, the one where I think that remains the case to some extent is Meisner-based training. And people often say it's because it's so much more easily codified, and he lays out this plan and sequence of exercises. So it's easier for subsequent generations to teach. I'm not saying it's easy to teach Meisner, but there's more of a formula than there is in the teaching of Strasberg and Adler, which has been more handed down through tradition and through the texts, but they're not as systematized as Meisner's system is, or technique. That's what the Meisner technique.
How do you think, it would seem to me that female directors might be particularly in a position to interpret the classics differently. So if we're thinking about, we were talking before, and you talk in your book about Sam Shepard, the plays of Sam Shepard and Sam Shepard actresses, which I did really understand, and we all do if we've seen a Sam Shepard play. But is there I wonder how female directors can work on that material in a way that puts a different light
in a
on
new
it.
way. Yes, I will. I did. Tina's referring to a portion of my book where I do say I went to acting school in the 80s, and it did seem that everyone was doing scenes from Sam Shepard, because that was his like big moment. So there was a lot of crawling around on the floor, and I mean, really, Fool for Love, isn't she at his feet and sort of begging? And there was a lot of that sort of thing.
I think there was a Sam Shepard scene every week in class.
Exactly.
Bar none, fail none. Every play, lots of things being thrown. Like,
yeah, exactly. The men get to throw things, and the women are sort of
right. Lots of chairs
right.
broken.
So yeah, I mean, you ask a great question, and I've recently become really interested in feminist directors. And so we're not always getting feminist direction from women directors, of course. I think we all know. Well, I'm thinking about just, is it the last decade of, people being up in arms about how few companies are run by women, how there aren't as many women directors. This is changing, of course. This is, and for the better, there's a lot more representation. I've become a sort of follower of the British director Katie Mitchell, and I wrote a piece on her production of A Woman Killed with Kindness that was just, I mean, breathtaking and astonishing. And she is a rigorous Stanislavskian. Her book on directing, I think it's called The Craft of, it's actually it's within reach at my study here. But it's, when I read it, I thought it's exhaustive and exhausting. But she is a rigorous Stanislavskian, and yet an inspired feminist director and innovator. And I'm also interested recently in the work of Marianne Elliott. And I'm thinking, I'll do a shout out, and I hope I say her name right. Is it Brenda Jeffers? Is that what she? Do you know
Jeffers?
about in town?
I may be butchering it, Brenna. I'm sorry if I did. Local?
Yeah,
Brenna. Yeah, from Philly.
Brenda. A few years ago, I had assigned students. We were reading Children's Hour, and I remember thinking, yeah, what do you do with this material? Particularly. Particularly, obviously, we've got material where the lesbian kills herself in the end. Spoiler alert for if you haven't read Children's Hour. So I remember thinking, what do you do with this? And we studied it in class, and I like to bring them to see realism. It was at Ego Poe, and I thought what she did was absolutely inspired. We were seeing the play, and the play as written, but and this is what I love about acting and about feminist sensibility in the theater, it was inflected with so many layers. I don't know if you saw that production, but she did really complicated things with the young women who played the students, little Mary, who makes up this lie, and really interesting things between the actresses. I mean, everybody in the production was terrific. And so it's just a single local production that I can think of where I saw this canonical piece that's problematic from a contemporary perspective. And we saw the play, and she didn't really have to change anything, but there were these nuances in it.
Right. Yeah, I do think that if you bring your lived experience and your understanding of the world to the table, and which is not to take anything away from just the genius of how these things get executed, but I do think having someone come to the table through whose through their eyes we are seeing, you're it would seem to me you could avoid some of the, which is not to say that every woman directing a play is going to like avoid those traps, but you can you don't even have to sidestep. I think you can go through it, but because your world is just so very different, the play gets interpreted differently. That seems like a great place to begin, because when you're thinking about the classics, whether it's Tennessee Williams or Sam Shepard or whoever you're looking at, I think it does matter through whose eyes we are.
Well, I'm working a project right now. It's sort of with Zoom teaching. It's on the back burner, but I've been working on this project on and off for a while about Linda Lohman, and I call it my Linda Lohman project. But I had the opportunity to see the Marianne Elliott reconceiving of Death of a Salesman in England last year. Well, I guess it was 2019, pre-pandemic. It was reimagined as an African-American Lohman family. And Sharon Clark played Linda Lohman. And I had an opportunity to interview her afterwards. And I most particularly want to write about that production because I've been thinking about Linda Lohman for a while. And seeing that play directed by a woman and with that actress, it was really a revelation. So I do intend to write about that production, but entirely different from all the other major revivals.
I remember lots of controversy over the Cherry Jones Zachary Quinto back in 2013 Glass Menagerie.
Yeah, I saw that production. What was the controversy? Remind me.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I loved it, but I know that that wasn't the opinion of everyone. I mean, I think the controversy might have been, I don't know, it was controversy, but it was just sort of like, is this interpretation of Amanda one that we can get behind? I mean, I think there were a number of discussion points on the table. I really got behind her as as a sturdier and very probably different kind of Amanda than we might normally see. But that just resonated with me as a woman, as a single mother, as a person who wants the best for your kid. I don't know, that really resonated for me. And so I often wonder, are audiences ready sometimes to see their Tennessee Williams done differently, or to see, and I'm not saying that audiences didn't love the play, because I think they did, but are audiences ready to be, and that's probably not the first question that should be asked, is just do it and they'll come, but isn't it
well, you know what, first I have to tell you, I'm a huge Terry Jones fan, like huge follower. But since you brought up Amanda, I would love to just talk about this for a minute. I don't know if it's that production and the fact that I teach it. And it's only as I continue to revisit that play that I'm reminded anew that this is just Tom's memory of his mother. And so when we talk about Amanda, we always talk about her like she is, like that is who Amanda is. But it's just it's what he's taken away, right? Which I think gives us liberty for new interpretations in all different ways she can be, because we're not getting a straight scripted character like we are in I'm thinking, for example, like Streetcar, where we know what Williams is saying about these people, and I mean we can do script analysis to work out what's happening in Glass Menagerie. But have you played that
No, no.
role? Might you?
Yeah, I mean,
You
it's,
should.
well, I love, I mean, Williams is just,
And you had your wonderful eccentricities that.
well, I mean, that was a bit, let's face it. I mean, as a female director, and I really realizing I'm way too old to play that role as written the way that it was, but it also, by doing that, it allowed me to pursue a different side of this character who, if she did not find this last chance cafe by way of John, now it's a different outcome, right? And
Yep.
it has a different feel to it. And that's what got me so excited about doing it. And I realized I was taking risk and the audience might not buy it and all of that. And I it's not that I don't, because you don't want to stretch it too far, right? You don't want to stretch it too thin. But yet I do think it opens up doors to entirely different generations of women for whom, like, did changing the age, as long as my parents were as long as we were relative to each other,
Yes.
I just felt like it opened up, at least from the perspective of digging into the play, some opportunities that didn't leave me sidelined.
Well, I do, and not only that, Tina, but you're making me. I'm thinking about ageism, women and ageism in the theater, and I may be wrong, but it feels to me like once upon a time there was more latitude, and older women were playing younger roles. It's not film, so why not? But it did offer a new window. I'm thinking. I'm just remembering a story, someone I worked with many years ago. I might have been, I never got to play Nellie Forbush in South Pacific, and I would have made an excellent Nellie. But I did get to do a cabaret, singing all those songs, the Rodgers and Hammerstein cabaret, in my singing days. And the director I was working with, Tom Haas, who I adored, he had directed a production once, and he said he thought it was critical that Nellie be older, and this needed to be her last chance. So this romance in South Pacific, she's not, even though she's as corny as whatever, what are those lyrics in Kansas? I could sing it if I gave
Feel
it.
free to sing it, yeah.
But I'm as corny as Kansas in August. That should have been right at the tip of my tongue. But no, I think these are such interesting ideas to bring to scripts, right? What does it mean if she's older? Or what if it means if she looks different than what we expect this person to look? That might be what you were getting at. I don't know if you were or not, but Cherry Jones is a person of stature. She's of height. And
I thought that just played really interestingly off this, like, shattering internal situation that she had going on. And when she put that the way she was costumed in that large confection of a dress that they had her in, it was just heartbreaking. I thought, I don't know. I find those opportunities, when you say corny as, or what is it? Corny as
Kansas in August.
Courteous, whatever, right? That it made me think of Come Black Little Sheba. That was a different, we had a bit of a different, a different take on that as well. But I do think those are some of the opportunities that are provided, which is one reason why maybe, people always say, well, why are you directing it in and these things? And they're very valid questions, but it also provides an opportunity for you to hold on to this idea that if you were to try to translate it to someone else would be complicated. So I'm all about, like, women getting in there and bringing their own lived experience to the table to see are there ways in which these plays can live and resonate in this time. What's a role for you that you can't wait to get your hands on?
Oh, I don't think I've ever been that kind of actor. Um, yeah, which I know is unusual. I did. That's funny that I should say I did want to play Nellie. That summer I played Sarah Brown in Guys and Dolls instead. So those were my singing ingenue days. It's also funny, Tina, because having been away from acting regularly because of teaching, and I run the program and writing and research. Um, something happens is you look up and you realize, oh, those roles I played, those aren't the roles I can play anymore. So I've been on my own little journey in the last couple of years, wanting to revisit acting, feeling like that is at the root of everything that I do. And so I'm writing about it and I'm teaching it and I'm directing and I'm thinking about it, but I haven't been acting. So in the last few years, I have, been trying to put my toe back in and flex those muscles. And I did spend almost half a year going up to New York twice a week to study with Austin Pendleton at HB Studio. And I remember I actually said to him on the first day, now, and it's a class where a lot of the students return and they're regulars, and I was new and nervous. And it was the studio practice. So it was the sort of upper level class. And I said, I really think I would be more comfortable doing contemporary material. And instead, he right away he gives me Ibsen's John Gabriel Borkman, which I find is such a heartbreaking play. And so playing one of those older ladies in that, and that was really very interesting. Yeah.
So what made you think you wanted to stick with contemporary? Was that because you thought it would be an easy way to get back into it?
Yes. I just thought,
Oh,
I thought
interesting.
it'd be more accessible. Not that I can't do that material, but I
Yeah.
thought, oh, and the other thing I forgot, and he gave me Chekhov, he gave me
Or Strindberg. Yeah.
Cherry Orchard, yeah, which
Mm,
is age appropriate. And I think it felt frightening to me is my
yeah.
first step back. Right, Strindberg. So there are all those wonderful roles out there. I think I've just been wanting to, just so I threw myself into it, and it was great fun.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
he was exploring classics in that course. And then summer before last, I had an opportunity that I thought for anyone who teaches within the sound of my voice, I thought it was fantastic. I went up to, I like HB Studio. These are Uttahagan's people, but they don't just teach her approach. But this was called the Uttahagan Teacher Institute, and it was I was taught by Carol Rosenfeld and Mark Nelson, and it was a 2-week intensive for teachers of acting, where you're an acting student, but you're also given the opportunity to then respond to your peers as a teacher, kind of implementing Hagen's approach. And it was it was an amazing experience. 2 full-time weeks. And I absolutely loved it. And I want to say 1812 did it because I feel like Jen Childs was in it. But it was Jen Silverman's The Roommate. And that was a lot of fun because it was also age appropriate, but contemporary and funny and charactery. And that was something I had not done a lot of when I was young, is character work. And so yeah, fun explorations.
Did you have any of those um, lingering, I'll use a strong word for this, trauma from your earlier days? Not trauma of you personally, but I mean of the experiences you had when you were first out of school and you were up in those classes and you found them to be difficult and kind of, challenging in that way. Did you come into the room with any of that? I mean, I imagine you were very curious as to how acting training had changed in that period of time since you had been there last.
Well, first, mostly, I will say I was I was a nervous wreck returning to it because it had been a while. And then the thrill of just, it is like riding a bicycle, or for me, realizing I could be completely present with my partner and unaware of, well, we know what we mean when we say unaware of the audience, but it just not where my head was at all with what was going on with my peers who were also a wide range of ages, including people older than myself. I think the key difference in the classes I've done at HB, um, these were mostly professional people, and not, newly out of college or very, very young in training. So bringing in life experience, that's already one thing. But what I would say about Hagen, I did get to see her on stage only once, and she was really a spectacular actress. Um, a lot of us teach from her book, A Respect for Acting, and the second one, Challenge for the Actor. But she really had this belief that you do not direct students. You do not direct them. And that really translates to you don't tell them what to do. And in fact, I will share just one moment in this class. I mean, and I admire Austin Pendleton as an actor. I remember having seen him in my childhood in What's Up, Doc, and so many, things throughout the years. And of course, I've written about Uttahagan, and there was a day I said, okay, so I know you don't want to tell me what to do, but could you just tell me what to do? Because I just so desperately wanted direction. But their ethos, I think they're fantastic people. The pricing of the classes is sensitive to and supportive of students. I think the people who teach there really care. There are a lot of prominent, accomplished people who are not doing this to make a living. They are doing it because they want to give back. I mean, it's really wonderful. But so the approach, it's what Hagen says you should do, but they do it. So learning to ask questions like, they really, after you do a scene, will say, tell me about that. And you tell them. And from the teaching perspective, what was really great, what I learned about teaching there, was it becomes about how do you ask the right question. You can detect what happened that didn't work in the scene. And I'll just give you one example that was amazing. I was working with this woman who's a professor in Virginia, and I don't think I knew this right away. I had seen her on Broadway in the 80s. She was a Broadway actress who became a scholar and professor. And she had this meticulously researched scene. And there was something that didn't seem truthful to me in the scene. I didn't believe what she was doing. And I just said to her, tell me about the meal. And she paused and she went, right. Okay. I said, do you want to do it again? And she did it again. And that was the framework they gave us. So we were practicing teaching in front of our teachers after this period of time. And I was just so delighted because I asked the right question. And she was an actress who didn't then, she got it. I think that is more challenging with young people and with people with no acting experience, because there's no framework for, if you say, yeah, tell me about that meal. And really what it was something along the lines of, in that particular scene, something had happened. She's very disappointed somebody doesn't come to dinner, and she sets about whatever she did herself. I could just see she had not absorbed what had just happened, but she didn't even tell her that because she knew it. And she did it again, and it just was like this lovely self-development. I think with young people who don't have training and haven't acted, that sort of really open-ended approach is hard because you don't know why it's not truthful yet. You just don't know why.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the concept of, and there's a bunch of questions here I want to get to too in a second, Rose. This idea of truth on stage, I think, does it lie, and it lies all places, right? It lies with the actor, it lies with the guru or whoever's sort of observing, and it lies with the audience. And I you'll often read anecdotes where the person the teacher is saying that just wasn't truthful, and you get into this, how could you figure out your way through that if you in fact believe you were delivering your truth in that moment? Then if it's hierarchical, you're going to be questioning what you did. And whereas a more open-ended approach, as you're saying, where you're trying to pull out the reasons, will probably get you to the end result in a way that doesn't pull into question the reality that you just experienced. Is that, what I mean?
For those of us who teach and direct, and I do write about this, we're all bringing in our own biases about behavior and how people behave, and whether that seems like a way a person would behave in that set of circumstances. I do think there is such a thing, though, and I feel like I know it when I see it. Sometimes I feel you can tell if an actor is listening to the partner and responding in the moment, as opposed to being walled off. It's visible.
Energetically, it's visible, right? And I think that extends to the audience as well.
Say more.
Well, it feels like there's no disputing the presence or being present in the moment. And I think that translates energetically, meaning like, not like the audience can feel that when we're all in the same presence. Even in a very large theater, you can feel the compression of being present with the other person, just as you just said, listening, deep listening, being in tune with that. And I wonder, when in the class you were speaking of, when you gave the redirection, or you asked her the question, what was happening in the meal, and she went back and did it again, was it just a question of readjusting and just bringing oneself to the metaphorical table that changed the scene?
She had a whole different take on what happened to the food.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. Oh, she came back with a whole different take on what happened to the food, and I'm trying to remember. I think the way it went the first time was, she's really disappointed that somebody doesn't come. And I can't remember if this is from a play or whether we were also to create these situations, but there's a phone call, I think, and she's clearly, the scene was, it was a Hagen exercise, I guess, getting everything ready, preparing the meal. She's getting herself ready, she's waiting, and the person doesn't come. And in the first scene, I think what she did was just like begin to enjoy the meal. And there was just something about it. And I think the second time she just looked at the meal and she took it out into the kitchen.
So she was the only person in the scene at that point?
Oh, yeah.
It was just her and the food?
To be clear, it was an exercise, but it was an exercise
Gotcha.
meant to develop these kinds of skills to bring to a scene. So I think it was a whole rehearsed, because this is how Hagen worked, a whole rehearsed object lesson or whatever. And we know, and she knows her circumstances, and she's the only one in it, and we know what's happening, and we see this deep disappointment. It's not casual, and this was all so truthful to the moment. But then when she sort of gleefully, or not gleefully, but it seemed to me she just dug into the food, and it didn't. So all I just said was, tell me about the meal. And I think that was all she needed for what our instructor kept saying. I love this, but the penny drops. She kept using the expression, when the penny drops. And you could see the penny dropped. And what she did instead felt like a truer outgrowth of the moment before it, that she'd gone to all this trouble and the person hadn't come. There are a bunch of different ways you could play it. It might even have been then moving to comfort eating, but there was just something that didn't connect from the moment of disappointment to the food. And then all she needed was tell me about the meal. And she came back with this incredibly inventive, more truthful to this spectator, but also to herself moment.
Yeah, that's a great story. Love that.
But I love that. The approach is really, really cool. But as I say, there was also that moment I just wanted to say, and did say, could you just tell me what to do?
Yeah, yeah. Well, sometimes don't you just, I don't know, what do you think that is? We're just impatient or lazy, or
Well, we want to do
lazy is
it
not a
right.
good word. That's not a good word to
No,
describe
I
it,
think
but
we want to do it right. Or I think
yeah,
in that situation, maybe the problem for me, it was the penny wasn't dropping because I'm very good at taking notes. And I used to love to take notes. And you tell me what to do and I can deliver what you ask for. But I think that, and this is what Stella Adler would say, that, no director worth their salt, no actor worth his or her or their salt, needs a director. She says you cannot rely on a director.
right.
And of course, I think I'm not an experienced film actress, but my understanding is people don't get much direction, right? You really do need to be ready to go with your own technique and what you're doing and make your choices. And so it might be a wanting reassurance or wanting to please, I don't know, that asking for direction, but to get it right.
Maybe. In the 10 years since, about 10 years since the book, your book came out, and in the work that you're doing as a professor, are certainly a lot has been said about the generations to come, and how their attitude towards towards everything, anything and everything, is a little bit different. Do you think this will be, um, I guess this is a multi-pronged question, but do you think it will be as hard for them, as challenging, in the sense of feeling like they have to deliver what's asked and can't push back? Do you know, like, I'm wondering, like, will we, the kinds of things that you spoke about in the book and that you experienced and that I've experienced and that many actresses and actors have experienced, it's hard to imagine some of those things happening today, right? Like, if I go back to my thinking about the guy was trying to get me to, like, I don't know, find some sexuality in me, which is hard to find, and by asking me to, like, do something with a chair that I was not doing, and I just was like, no, I don't think we're gonna do that today.
Oh, you did say that?
I did.
Were you really, really young, or I mean, or
No, I think that I didn't have the benefit of going through a program in a conservatory or everyone. I was a journalism major, I came into this and I started studying and whatnot. And it didn't occur to me to say, oh, sure, I'll get on that bus. I was like,
what you did was courageous. I think
I was like, nah,
because
that's not going to work. I was like, humping this chair is not going to work right now. It's not.
and this is the sort of thing they asked of us. Why?
Well, yeah, it did feel strange. And I was like, I don't think we're going to get to Toledo on that train today. So let me go work on that and I'll be back. Okay. But
well, first of all, we are, so the whole Me Too moment, I feel my books, there was only one case I knew of, of somebody who was prosecuted, and I guess, famous acting teacher, who was in big trouble in New York I think in the 80s. But we always knew this stuff was going on, right? And there weren't many cases I could point to when I wrote the book, but now there's so much stuff out there with people starting to talk. So, I mean, I think, one of the issues, I only write about the actor training process, but as we know, this is a problem in the business, and there's always been the quote unquote casting couch, but all these stories of abuse. So I think there's more, there's heightened awareness. Young people are aware. Young people know when they're being manipulated and asked to do inappropriate things. And there's all this interesting work going on right now, as I'm sure you know, with intimacy training.
mm-hmm.
And that seems to me hugely important, that in the same way we handle fight choreography, to delicately manage matters that have to do with sexuality and intimacy on stage and in class, which is not, not how things have been handled in the past. There's still a problematic power dynamics and hierarchies, but you raise a really good point. And our students, I hope less likely to be vulnerable to mistreatment in classrooms and rehearsal rooms.
And so
What do
much
you
of it
think?
is,
What do you think?
I think, I mean, I don't know. You're in the classroom and you see it. And I tend to work at the IRC. I would say, the existential crises generally happen, which is not to say younger people don't have existential crises, but the work of Beckett and Ionesco often features, actors that are, not right straight, not really young, which doesn't mean there's any demarcation there. It's just that they're more likely to say that that's not going to work. I'm not doing that or whatever. And and we work a little bit differently anyway, but I do hope that, because we bring our sensitivity to the table and we bring wanting, I think we're always going to want to do what the director wants us to do. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's just, we want to do that. And it is hard to act and direct yourself at the same time. So you have to put your trust in somebody, and I guess that's a subject for a whole nother show that well, in another, another time and place we can talk about. I do hope that changes, though. I mean,
I do too.
I want to get there's, thank you all so much for asking questions in here. This is Emily saying the discussion of kind of brutal teaching brings to mind an earlier interviewer that we had, or an earlier guest that we had on the show, who was looking for ways to make auditions more humane, just to make that process because boy, that's a killer, right? I mean, it's just psychologically, like,
I've been auditioning. Well, before the pandemic, I did start auditioning. And I mean, it's so easy to make them humane. And that's a thing I always do with students. And it's amazing to me how people choose not to. I mean, really, right?
It is, right. It's one of the hardest parts of the journey.
It is. And it takes so little to have a short conversation with a person to make them feel like a human being. Introduce yourself. What does that take? How many seconds does that take? And then and thank them. And the other thing, if anyone out there, if I audition for you, you can file this away. I also do think it's a lovely courtesy, and I'm talking about around town, but anywhere. It's a lovely courtesy to invite someone to do their monologue a second time, or a reading a second time, even if you're not interested. I think it's a lovely courtesy to give that little bit of direction or make a suggestion and see what happens, so that people feel valued. Because we are really vulnerable auditioning, and it doesn't really bear much resemblance to the acting process at all. I feel much more vulnerable auditioning than throw me into something or ask me to do something and I'm fine. The auditioning is something I'm learning to do again, and was feeling pretty good about myself for putting myself out there.
Yeah, I think because you're coming into a different set of sort of rules and vibration in each room that you come into, and it takes a little bit of time to kind of suss out what's going on, and you don't have that time.
Right.
You kind of have to shut that down, and yet you're receiving all that information. It's coming through. So yeah, it's like walking into a hornet's nest sometimes, and I'm not bad. It's just a lot of energy and a lot of.
And I've had people, I don't want to, I haven't gone on that many auditions, and some people I've been out for have been just so gracious and lovely. People I know, people I don't know, but we've all had that experience where it's all very cold. And I think putting actors at ease is a useful thing for directors to do, to make people comfortable.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's certainly a much better position to start from.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I'm hearing my mother's clock chime 6. Rose, this is a great conversation. Thanks so much for taking the time. I could have this conversation a lot with you, and I hope we'll do it again.
Yes, well, I'll invite you back to my class where we have enjoyed
Oh,
you visit us, and thank you so much
oh,
for inviting me to do this.
oh, it was my
I
pleasure. I learned so much, and I hope we can continue the conversation again.
absolutely,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
All right,
Bye.
bye-bye.
And thanks everybody to you for being here and being a part of our audience today. And hopefully soon we can all be back in theaters around the country. And I do hope if you're here next Saturday in a place near a computer at 5 p.m., you'll join us for Into the Absurd, when our guests are going to be Liz Goldberg Johnson and Warren Bass. Warren is a filmmaker. He and Liz, who is an artist, a painter, an illustrator, and animator, have worked together to collaborate on a couple of projects, Cuban Queens and Voguing and Other Pleasures. So we're going to talk to Warren and Liz about their wonderful collaborations that have earned many international awards and been recognized in juried, whatever the word is I'm looking for, in juried competitions. That's the word I'm looking for. Liz has been on the show a couple of times, and she's always just brings her energy and her joy in her work and her life. And I can't wait to meet Warren and talk to them about making Cuban Queens, which they were in Havana, where Liz was sketching many, many, many sketches that went into the compilation of this animated film. So we'll talk to them next Saturday at 5 p.m. And in the meantime, just wishing you a very safe week ahead. I hope you get your vaccine, keep your mask on, keep creating, and we'll see you back at the table next Saturday at 5. Thanks.